Hello and welcome fellow motorsports fans. Isack Hadjar's incredible journey through this Australian race weekend is only one of many brilliant single-seater related racing stories unfolding over the past weekend, and as always I'm here to tell you all about it, so let's not waste any more time. We begin in Brazil with the first round of Brasilian F4, and I have to quickly get this out of the way first. I normally don't follow Brazilian F4 that closely. I watch a few one-off rounds over the course of the year, but this will be my first season of following the entire thing, so just keep that in mind if I don't know all that much about the second year drivers in particular. So we want to use this episode to just sort of outline the general pecking order as I saw them in the first round. And first and foremost, I have to say Alvaro Cho looked like the man to beat in the first round. Dominated race one, was the best charger in the reverse grid second race, and I'm sure he would have done a good job in the third race as well, but unfortunately he had some sort of mechanical or electric issue before the race even began and therefore lost a couple laps before it even started. Nonetheless, he is so far the primary championship contender, at the very least from what we can tell with only one round. On the rookie side of things, and in some ways even more impressive to me, was Ethan Nobels, the younger brother of Aurélien Nobels, the female Ferrari junior, in case you're not familiar. And he hit the ground running, and there's really no complaints. He was the top rookie in the first race, he won the reverse grid second race, and he worked his way to being the top rookie in the third race as well, which was a very, very wet race. And then unfortunately he eventually made a bit of a rookie error, had a little spin, and couldn't finish the race. But nonetheless, he definitely had the best pace out of all the rookies, no doubt about it. Last but not least, the special thing about Brazilian F4, in case you don't know, is actually the high percentage of female drivers, with only 11 drivers on the grid, I believe. There is 2 female drivers among them, so there's Rafaela Ferreira and Celia Rebelo, I want to say. Forgot her first name right now, it doesn't really matter. She's unfortunately the bad one. Both are second year drivers now. Rebelo, not as impressive, unfortunately. Haven't really seen much of an upside, but Ferreira I already remember impressing me last year, and she continued this year, which, listen, we have to set the expectations. Impressing in this sense, it's still a lower tier 4 series. When I say she impressed me, I don't mean she's going to go to F3 in 2 years and start winning stuff. Definitely not. But she is a reasonably capable young female driver, and that's all I want to say. And she might be worth following in the next couple of years. Nonetheless, let's get to the big stories in F3. After a few long weeks of waiting, F3 finally had its second round, and this one looked a lot more like we maybe expected. But maybe not in the practice sessions, because the first mental story already unfolded on the Friday with Tsolov sort of crashing into Alex Dunne in practice, which by all accounts looked like he did it on purpose. I hope I can show you this clip right here and it doesn't get striked. But quite just bizarre scenes and things you certainly, you never want to see a wreck like this. You definitely don't want to see it in a practice session. And I am really surprised he got away with only a light grid drop. I am very much a believer in this. This should have probably been a race ban, you know, like the Dellini treatment essentially, which I think we still don't even know what's going to happen to Dellini anyway. That's a very different story. Nonetheless, very scandalous start to the weekend, but unfortunately it did settle down a little bit and we got some fantastic racing, I have to say. In particular, the feature race stood out with a tyre management heavy race. It's very, very rare to get them this extreme in F3 in particular. Everyone was struggling to keep their rear tyres underneath them, so it quickly turned into a race where in particular all the experienced guys could shine. So we had Luke Browning, Gabriele Mini, Dino Beganovic and Fornaroli all at the front. And eventually Beganovic finally got what was his maiden victory. I was a little surprised to actually find out about this. Somehow in my mind he won a race last year, but you know, goes to show how good he is. So I believe that even though he never managed to actually do it. And in some ways more impressive than the 4 second year guys doing really, really well. Obviously they are the expected front running crowd. Was Charlie Wirtz in the Jensen nonetheless, charging his way to the front in sort of the final third of the race, you want to say, and he actually outright won the midfield in P5. So that was an incredibly impressive race from a rookie period, but in particular when factoring in the tire safe heavy nature of the race. So fantastic performance there. In the sprint, we had a couple different actors shining, in particular Matthias Stenshorn getting his maiden victory. Once again, Van Erpen in the mix. I won't forget him this time around. Lindblad also made the best of it. He looks like one of those sprint race merchants this year, which technically, given it's his first year in the series, that's a very good achievement if he can continue fighting for sprint race wins at least. But it's still a bit funny that he's nowhere near this level in the actual features. It's a bit interesting to see. A different story I want to highlight for the weekend though is, well, it's just two sides to this. First of all, Campos being sick all around. We'll get to this in F2 in a second, but that was also the case in F3. All three of them were performing very well. But this goes hand in hand with the surprise here is really Sebastian Montoya. I talked quite badly about him in the past. You know, I am not very convinced that he is a super capable racing driver, but honestly he looks like he might be proving me wrong this season if he can keep this up. He was actually matching his teammates, fighting his teammates, beat his teammates in the feature. Probably in the sprint as well. I think he briefly beat them and then dropped back down again, but nonetheless he can actually battle Goethe and Boyer, and I did not expect this. So yeah, there we go. Shout out to Montoya. Now let's get to the biggest scandal of the weekend in F2. Future Marcel here, because the recording from yesterday was unfortunately shot, hence why you are watching this on the Wednesday and not on the Tuesday. But anyway, let's talk about the big story from the weekend. Isack Hadjar's weird journey throughout, beginning with the very weird crash in the sprint race where he had a good start, but unfortunately it wasn't quite as good as his teammate Pepper Marty's start. He didn't realize that his teammate had such a good start and tried to go to the center of the track anyway, which ended up collecting both Marty and also Gabriel Bortoletto, sending them into pit road, which is first of all a pretty scary incident in and of itself, even though fortunately at pretty low speeds, but still a bizarre incident, and also one which ended up costing Hadjar the win because he had a dominant race car. The Campos was the car to beat all weekend long really. But unfortunately, race control did decide that even though he won the race in dominant fashion, he was going to get slapped with a huge penalty, dropping him back down to P6. The penalty itself was a little bit controversial even, or at least the magnitude of the penalty, but I personally believe it was the correct choice. We can argue about the specific seconds he should have gotten, how many positions he should have lost essentially. But let's be real, yeah, if you take out your main rivals on the start-finish straight on lap 1, you probably just can't be allowed to win the race, especially in the junior formulas. It just sets a very wrong precedent, if you ask me. So something had to be done, unfortunately, as unfortunate as it is for Hadjar, who up until this point has been a little bit cursed throughout the season. But obviously he did turn it around massively in the feature race, where he ended up lucking into the perfect strategy by pitting a lap later. Technically Campos gave Marty the better strategy, but it ended up working out correctly with the safety car timing, shuffled Hadjar from around P7 to the lead, and he never had to look back because, as I said earlier, he had the fastest car. Inarguably, really, the Campos looked absolutely rapid all weekend long. So yeah, he finally won a feature race in pretty convincing fashion. Not dominant, but convincing is an appropriate term. Now, another race has been won obviously during the sprint race, which is just a very nice feel-good story because the guy who inherited the win from Hadjar was Roman Stanek in the Trident, and for once the Trident actually won a race and didn't get DQ'd afterwards, which is also quite lovely to see. So yeah, congrats to Roman Stanek. It certainly wasn't on my bingo card to see him win a race this year, but yeah, I love to see it anyway. Now, the other big story that we're always keeping an eye on when watching Formula 2, obviously, is the what was the expected championship battle between Martins and Bearman and maybe Antonelli in the mix. And I have to say, it's still thoroughly underwhelming. There's a little fun fact, which is that now Rafael Villagomez is actually ahead of both Victor Martins and Ollie Bearman in the standings. Had anyone told us this before the season, we would have just probably laughed at them. So it shows how ridiculous these opening couple of rounds really have been for the championship fight, and it is still as wide open as it has been throughout the last couple of weeks. For Antonelli in particular, he continues improving steadily, I would say. He had a little bit of an oopsie during race 1, where he spun out, sort of synchronized spinning with For Sure, even though it looked like no contact. It was a very fun one. Maybe I can show it on here, but Liberty Media, you know how it is. Anyway, he was in podium contention during the feature, had his first front row start, so in particular the quali pace is getting there. That's very nice to see. During the race, he dropped back a little bit. I thought he was going to get a podium, especially with all the chaos surrounding, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, he finished P4, so still a very good result. Still, the rookie that continuously is stealing the show from him is Paul Aron, who first of all made his way onto the podium again in the feature race, passed Antonelli on track, beating Zane Maloney as well. Just continuously incredible rookie drives, really. I didn't see this coming from Aron. Obviously, he's a known good driver, but I didn't expect him to be like a Rookie of the Year candidate at all. And if this continues, I'm sure an academy will pick him back up in no time. Now, last but not least, the last sort of big name we have to talk about here is Dennis Hauger, who looks like he will be a championship contender this year. He could be doing a Drugovic type season, randomly sniping the title in the MP. But unfortunately, it's just a continuous struggle for Hauger to actually string together the whole weekend. He got a P2, well, he inherited P2 in the sprint race. That was already set him up for success. And then obviously started on pole for the features. So he was, yeah, set up to have an amazing weekend in terms of points scored. Led the first stint during the feature. It all looked to go according to plan. And then he lost it himself on his outlap after the pit stop during the feature. Cold, underinflated tires can be cruel, obviously, but that's just the type of error that you can't really get away with too often if you want to win any title, but especially one as competitive as this. So I still don't know what to make of Hauger. We know he's inarguably got the pace to do this. Could be one of those depressing seasons where either he stumbles enough to not get the title, or, which I'm almost more afraid of, I could see him winning the title and then not getting a seat anyway, because if he wants to get one, I think he has to get the title very, very dominantly, and so far it's not going to happen. Anyway, we'll keep a close eye on it all, but for now I'll hand back over to Past Marcel for the F1 segment. Formula One finally threw up a more discussion-worthy race this time around, even though the on-track product, yes, still not super exciting, unfortunately. I don't really know where the raceability of these new cars has gone over the last 2 years. Like, there's just nothing left. The races are back to pure strategic racing again, which, don't get me wrong, I don't mind it, I don't hate it, but, you know, a little more action would have been nice. Nonetheless, Verstappen having mechanical issues on lap 1, forcing him to retire the car very, very early into the race, obviously will throw up a bit of an exciting battle, or so one could think. We had Ferrari versus McLaren fighting for the win. In theory, in practice, Sainz was more or less in control after Verstappen retired and just kind of ran away with it. Leclerc had to fight a little to take the P2, but it did sort itself out reasonably quickly. In some ways, the biggest surprise there is that Perez was stuck down in P5. Apparently some minor damages, but still I feel like that's a thing to cover up a little bit. He just wasn't super impressive. Hamilton also suffered a DNF. I guess that's worth talking about, but not from an interesting position. He obviously wasn't in win or podium contention or anything, so for Hamilton standards, I doubt he cared too much. The interesting things to talk about really is the scandals, as always, with F1, and the big one here is Fernando Alonso and George Russell. Again, I hope I can show this, Liberty Media. Please, please let me show this clip. I definitely don't want to call it brake checking. Let's just say Alonso made a maneuver, being a bit slower into a corner than expected. In his mind, he wanted to get a better corner exit. In George Russell's mind, it was a bit of a brake check, and Russell essentially got frightened by Alonso slowing down in front of him and lost his car as a result, bringing the race to a slightly earlier end, and crucially causing a very, very dangerous scenario for Russell. So certainly not one you want to see. That was a crash that could have gone wrong quite quickly. Nonetheless, Alonso got slapped with a 20-second penalty for this, and I personally think it is a little ridiculous, in particular because even the stewards agree that they can't tell with certainty whether that was at all intentional or not, whether Alonso purposely misjudged it by this extent. So the thing is, he wanted to overslow the entry, but essentially he overslowed the entry even more than he would have had to get back on power a tiny bit, slow down again, and then get back on. So, you know, a little bit of a mess, but it could have just been an error or you know, some trickery obviously in the racing, but I don't think it was inherently dangerous, and so I don't think it should have been penalized. But yeah, I can definitely see both sides of the story, and you should let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments. Now, two just feel-good stories. Well, one feel-good story and one feel-good story with a horrible dark side to it as well. The pure feel-good story being double points for Haas. You just love to see it. Obviously, the two retirements helped big time to propel both Hülkenberg and K-Mag into the points. But yeah, when's the last time that has happened? I feel like that's been a couple of years ago, and in particular for both to then keep it clean and Haas not to mess up the strategy now that they have a chance to score points. You know, they still had to actually finish the race competently, even with the retirements ahead, and I'm glad that they did. The feel-good story with the dark element to it is Yuki Tsunoda, as some internet people have put it, ending Ricciardo's career in his hometown during his home race. And unfortunately, it did look a little like it, didn't it? Tsunoda absolutely stomped him in quali, absolutely stomped him in the race. Tsunoda brought it home in P8 and Ricciardo was nowhere to be seen. So that was a really bad look. And honestly, this Ricciardo just looks like the Ricciardo we've watched in McLaren for the last couple of years. This looks nothing like the one Red Bull has hinted at from simulator results, and maybe he just can't do it in the real car anymore for whatever reason. But at the moment, it's just a depressing look, and if he continues like this, I doubt he'll make it past the summer break. I don't know. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he can get it back together. But on the other hand, I actually personally wouldn't mind seeing some more youngsters getting a shot at that V-Carb seat again, instead of it being used by veteran drivers now, which goes a little against the initial idea, doesn't it? Before we come to the end of the episode, there was another single-seater race going on, and it was a bit of a wacky one, which was the $1 million thermal something challenge over in IndyCar. Thermal Club. I don't know why I can't remember names, as you might know. That's a common theme here. Nonetheless, yeah, IndyCar essentially decided to make a little bit of an exhibition race this time around. No championship points on the line. Fortunately, that would have been a mess. Essentially, it was just an opportunity for Alex Palou to win $1 million, which I'm sure he doesn't mind, but also doesn't really need. So, you know, it's hard to get too excited about it. My main story here was really Nolan Siegel getting his first outing in an IndyCar outside of testing, and he did reasonably well. He almost made it to the final, actually. If you're wondering why there's finals in an IndyCar race, don't ask. You don't want to know, trust me. It's not even worth going back to watch these races. Just accept that Alex Palou is still a god at driving race cars. This and more exciting news I'll bring to you next week. Until then, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the future.